Grab my bring up an old slideshow and sharing. There we go. Right, so tonight I'm going to talk about the Zodiac. Not necessarily the Zodiac in terms of people's horoscopes and things like that, just in terms of the constellations that are there and how they play into some of the things in the Bible. The stars may well tell the story of our history and future, for if you can learn to read it. There's certainly mention of it in the Bible, but it tells it at a terrifically large scale and very broad strokes. Don't use this talk as an excuse to start believing your horoscope in the newspaper. A couple of, I suppose, warnings about that sort of thing to start off with. In Deuteronomy 4:15, it says, "Take ye therefore good heed unto yourselves, for ye saw no manner of similitude on the day that the Lord spake unto you in Horeb, out of the midst of the fire." But when the Lord appeared to the people on Mount Sinai, on Mount Horeb, there wasn't an image of him that they could, carve out an idol of, is what they're saying. Lest you corrupt yourselves and make you a graven image, because the Lord didn't want the people to carve an idol of him and start worshipping that. It says, "Unless thou lift up thine eyes unto heaven, and when thou seest the sun and the moon and the stars, even all the host of heaven, shouldst be driven to worship them and serve them." The Lord was saying, don't start worshipping the stars and the moon and all that. Like they look beautiful, they look awesome, very mysterious, but it's not something to be worshipped. It also says in Isaiah 47, verse 13, "Let now the astrologers, the stargazers, the monthly prognosticators stand up and save thee from these things that shall come upon thee. Behold, they shall be as stubble. The fire shall burn them. They shall not deliver themselves from the power of the flame." There's no power in any of this stuff. There's in any of the astrology or stargazing. They can't even save themselves from destruction. But all right, to start off, in ancient times, right at the start of the Bible, there was a whole lot less light pollution to block out the stars. And the people back then tended to look up at the stars and see things and talk about them. And it became very significant in the culture of the Hebrews. Here's an example of light pollution nowadays. I was trying to take a photo of the aurora a few months ago. But the sky to the north of me is just totally dominated by light pollution. On the left, that's Providence, and on the right, that's Boston. And just kind of peeking over the top, you might be able to see a hint of red kind of around there. Everywhere else in the world, they could see that quite clearly, but not where I am. Too much light pollution. But by contrast, this is a photo taken at a dark sky reserve just outside of Adelaide. There's very strict local council rules to prevent light pollution of any sort. And when you're out there, you can see every star in the sky. You can see all the clouds of the Milky Way all the way through it. This is probably what would have been visible to the people in ancient times. People were outside more. They watched the sky and the stars. They grew familiar with the patterns. And in particular, the people called the Chaldeans in ancient times, they had a reputation for a long time as being expert astronomers and astrologers, stargazers. Now the Chaldeans lived in all of this area. It's all the same sort of people who became the Babylonians eventually, and even some of the precursors to the Israelites. In Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar turns to the Chaldeans, these people, when he was looking for someone to interpret his dream. And again, when he needed someone to interpret the writing on the wall. In Daniel 2, verse 1, it says, "In the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. Then the king commanded to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans, for to show the king his dreams." So the Chaldeans were kind of lumped in with all these other mystical, magical, voodoo sort of people. And Abraham was also a Chaldean. Abraham originated in the city of Ur, which is down here, sort of southern Iraq along the Euphrates River. Abraham came from the city of Ur of the Chaldeans, or Ur of the Chaldees. in Genesis 11, verse 31, says, and Terah took Abraham his son, and Lot the son of Haran his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, and his son Abraham's wife, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go and dwell in the land of Canaan. So they picked up from Ur and they sort of moved along there, ended up in Canaan some years later. And the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus describes Abraham as being a man of the Chaldeans who was righteous and great and skillful in the celestial science. So Abraham was very knowledgeable about the stars and the seasons and the times, and he would have passed that knowledge down to his children. So now we're having a look at the constellations that you see in the night sky. Here we're kind of looking towards the North Pole, which is that way. And you probably recognize a few of these. You've got over here Ursa Major, the Big Dipper. You've got like, I think down here, Canis Major, you've got Orion, somewhere around there. Some of the common things. And also running through the middle of it, you have the constellations that form what we call the Zodiac. You've got Leo, Cancer, Gemini, Taurus, Pisces. I think Aquarius is just off the end of it there. These constellations are specific to the modern European and Western culture. Just because we group the stars like this doesn't mean that Abraham would have grouped the stars in the same way, or that anyone else happens to. Looking up at the night sky, the stars are kind of like a join the dots puzzle, but none of them have any numbers on them or any specific groupings. People can group them however they like. For example, the Chinese have a totally different set of constellations using the same stars. So if you look at the thin blue lines joining all these dots together, those are the constellations we have. And then here's how they are in China. I'll flip back again. If you look at Leo in the bottom left, it's kind of this circular grouping. And in China, it's totally broken up into 3 or 4 other constellations. So what I'm saying here is that just because we group the stars like this doesn't mean that the ancient Babylonians did. So we have to have a look at and see what groupings did they put them in. So what did Abraham see? And how did he group them, and what meanings did he give to them? Now, quite fortunately, there is this piece of Babylonian writing from about 1300 BC, which comes from Babylon. And for reference, this is 1300 BC. Abraham would have been around in about 2000 BC, so 700 years before. And this piece of writing lists all of the constellations known to the Babylonians. As we read earlier in Daniel, the Babylonians were the successors to the Chaldeans. They lived in the same area. So the stars that the Babylonians would have seen would have been heavily influenced by Chaldean culture that came before them. And so this is probably the same stars that Abraham would have seen, as I said in Daniel 2. So this is a fairly faithful representation of the stars as they were seen in Abraham's time. And it's been reconstructed in this image here. What's quite interesting about it is that almost the majority of their constellations have been passed down exactly as they are to us as we see them today. If we start from the top here, we have the goat fish constellation, which is Capricorn as we know it. We have the Great One pouring out a vase of water, which is what we call Aquarius. Same goes around, Pisces. The Babylonian constellation of the bull is what we call Taurus now. The twins we now call Gemini, which still represents a pair of twins. The lion, which we now call Leo, and so on and so on. So our understanding of the stars, the constellations we use in our culture and society today, are pretty much exactly the same as they had back in ancient Babylonian times, which is really interesting to see that something like that has endured for 6,000 years, almost untouched. So The significance of the 12 constellations that are called the Zodiac is that they lie on a particular path in the sky, which is called the ecliptic. That represents the path that the sun takes over the course of a year. Now, what that means, because you obviously can't see the sun in the night sky, but if you sit out all night and watch the constellations as they wheel overhead, you'll see only ever at most 11 out of the 12 constellations. The 12th one will be hidden behind the sun. So there'll always be one missing every night. It looks kind of like this. There's the Earth, there's the sun. In this case, we'd say the time of year corresponds to the constellation of Aries. Or if you were born when this particular configuration happens, people would say you were born under the sign of Aries. And as the Earth progresses around this circle throughout the year, the sun hides a different constellation throughout the year. Now, these signs haven't always corresponded to the same time of year as they do now. So at this time of year, we're somewhere around Capricorn or Aquarius in being behind the sun. But throughout history, these have actually shifted slightly over thousands of years. So right now, there's a particular time of year called the vernal equinox or the spring equinox, which is used as a reference point for the start of this cycle. And that point has also shifted around throughout the year. So at the moment, the spring equinox lines up somewhere around here between Pisces and Aquarius. And the position of that spring equinox tells us what the astrological age is. I promise I'm getting to a point eventually. So right now, with the equinox being around here, we're sort of between Pisces and at the start of Aquarius. So as that song says, this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. But if we turn the clock back about 5,000 years to the time of the ancient Chaldeans, that drifts back over here to the constellation of Taurus. And that was what they called the age of Taurus. There's no sort of significance to the lives of people on the ground. It's just sort of where the sun is in the sky in the springtime. So what's all that got to do with the price of chips? We're not about to read Abraham's horoscope, if that's where you thought this was going. This, I believe, is the key to understanding a passage in the book of Genesis. Quite an interesting passage. In Genesis chapter 49, Abraham goes through a list of the 12 tribes, describing them each with a blessing and a bit of an interesting passage. Now, before we get to that, the children of Abraham are often associated with the stars of heaven. In Genesis 15, Genesis 22, and Genesis 26, the Lord tells Abraham, "I will multiply your seed as the stars of heaven." Also in Genesis 37, Joseph has a dream. He has this dream about being in the field and all the sheaves of wheat bowing down to him. And then later he has another dream. In Genesis 37, verse 9, it says, "He dreamed yet another dream, and he told his brethren and said, Behold, I dreamed a dream more. And behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me, or bowed down to me." Now he was foretelling that eventually his brothers would all bow down to him when he was a governor in Egypt. But interestingly, he says the 11 stars. Now he does use the Hebrew word for stars, but he may have figuratively or poetically meant constellations. There are, after all, more than 11 stars in the sky. And there are classically 12 constellations. So if 11 of these constellations are bowing down to Joseph as the 12th, which brings us to Genesis 49. which is Jacob's blessing and the prophecy of his sons. Now the whole passage in Genesis 49 is very cryptic, and there's a lot of symbolism going on, but it quite interestingly seems to align in the order that is given and the descriptions that are given with the constellations in the Babylonian zodiac or the Chaldean zodiac. So first of all, the order of blessings that are given in Genesis 49 does not match the order that Jacob's sons were born. The first four are right, but then the six in the middle are all mixed up all over the place, which to me means he's going by a different order. So let's have a look at these and how they line up with the order of constellations. Now, as I mentioned before, in Abraham's time, they were in the age of Taurus. So the start of the cycle of 12 starts with the constellation of Taurus. Let me just get my other notes up. So the first phrase, the first blessing in Genesis 49, talks about Reuben. He says, "Reuben, thou art my firstborn, my might and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellence of power." Now, talking about might and strength, that's always associated with bulls. The second passage says, "Simeon and Levi are brethren." It groups these two together. The next constellation is the twins. He goes on to say, "Instruments of cruelty are in their habitations," and gives a bit of a description about the actions that they had when they were seeking revenge for their sister Dinah. The next one is Judah. Judah is a lion's whelp. And we have the lion constellation next. It says, "From the prey, my son, thou art gone down. He stooped down, he couched as a lion, and as an old lion, who shall rouse him up? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come." Now, right here, between the feet of the lion, is a star that the Babylonians called King, the king star between the feet of the lion. It also says, so this is a different look of the same area. There's the lion there. Let me just get my other Bible app up. So as well as saying that Judah is a lion, it goes on to say, oh no, sorry, I was thinking about something else. Yeah, Judah is the lion. And then it says, Zebulun. "Zebulun shall dwell at the haven of the sea. He shall be for an haven of ships, and his border shall be unto Zidon." Now, originally, we go back to the Babylonian constellations, there was nothing really there that symbolized a haven of ships or anything like that. Nothing in the ancient times. But a few years later, well, quite a few years later, in 1687, this constellation was added here. This is the constellation of the sextant. The sextant is a navigation tool used on ships for accurately navigating ships. And also, quite curiously, in some of the writings around where Israel ended up after their captivity, it said that the tribe of Zebulun went on to become the Dutch people. Now, it happens that in the year 1687, the same year that this constellation was recognized, that the Dutch founded the colony of Cape Town on the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, which is a port that provides shelter, a haven, from some of the roughest seas in the world. So they waited a long time for that one to be fulfilled. The next one goes on about Issachar. "Issachar is a strong ass couching down between two burdens. And he saw the rest was good, and the land that it was pleasant, and bowed his shoulder to bear, and became a servant unto tribute." You can see the line we just had there. The next one along is this constellation of the furrowed ground, which is between the wheat sheaf and the cluster of dates. The two burdens that Issachar was crouched between in the pleasant land, like it says. It goes on to say about Dan. "Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel." The next constellation here is the scales, which had long been a symbol of justice and judgment. Even going back to the time of the ancient Egyptians, the scales were a symbol of the judgment of the dead. That it goes on to say, Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path, that biteth the horse heels, so that his rider shall fall backwards. Now, right next to this, the path of the ecliptic, and right next to the constellation of Dan is the constellation of the serpent. Here we're looking at another version of it. So there's the scales, and right next to it, as an adder by the path, as it says, a serpent by the way, is the constellation of Hydra, constellation of the snake. It says, Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder by the path, that biteth the horse heels, so his rider shall fall backwards. Right in front of the snake is the constellation of the horse. The next one, it says, Gad, a troop shall overcome him. So we just had Dan there as the scales. The next constellation around is the constellation of the warrior. Gad, a troop shall overcome him, but he shall overcome at the last. And then it says, out of Asher, his bread shall be fat, and he shall yield royal dainties. Next constellation is the Great One, or Ea, the Babylonian god, pouring out his bounty. Out of Asher, his bread shall be fat, he shall yield royal dainties. And then the next one, the next verse says, Naphtali is a hind let loose, he giveth goodly words. So there is a constellation of a hind, or a deer, or in this case, the stag, which is way off here. It's off the path. It's, as it says, Naphtali is a hind let loose. So here we have a hind, or a stag, who's loose. He's run off the path of the ecliptic. Then the next one is Joseph. It says, Joseph is a fruitful bough. Let's see. A fruitful bough by a well, whose branches run over the wall. So the next constellation around is this one, which we call Pisces nowadays. It is a branching constellation with a fish on one end and a swallow on the other end. Joseph is a fruitful bough. It's a branch and there's fruit on the end of it, or a fish. Representing Joseph, because the tribe of Joseph was split into Ephraim and Manasseh. And then the tribe of Manasseh, like the swallow's tail, was split further into east and west Manasseh. It says further on, the archers have sorely grieved him and shot at him and hated him. And down here we have the constellation of the bow and arrow pointing up in the direction of Joseph's constellation. And then finally, it says of Benjamin, Benjamin shall raven as a wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. Now there are actually two wolf constellations. You have to zoom out quite a bit. There's one in the northeastern sky, and there's one in the southwestern sky, located basically opposite each other at other ends of the sky. So like it says, Benjamin shall raven at a wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. There's always, at morning and at night, one of these constellations of the wolf in the sky somewhere. Do have quite a few more slides, but we're kind of running out of time. So just basically to bring it to a conclusion of some sort. Yeah. Oh, there we are. Yeah, so firstly, apologies, there wasn't much of a spiritual message in all of that, but I did think it was quite interesting and quite a good explanation for the meaning of Genesis 49, which has been a very cryptic and confusing passage for me for quite some time, and for a bit of historical context of the Old Testament. Yeah, so I'd like to leave it there.